Hello, my loves, and welcome to the Native Growth Podcast. I'm your hostess, Lauren Jean Brabson, and this is a place where we'll talk all things personal and spiritual growth. This is the intersection of the human experience, the intelligence of Mother Earth, and the inner workings of Creator. I hope this podcast empowers you to live your fullest potential, your innate manifestation, your native growth. All right, thank you so much for joining me from wherever you are in time and space. This episode I'm calling Home is Where the Heart Is, and it's not only because next week is Valentine's Day, which has its roots, but it's obviously become a bit of like a Hallmark holiday. But I think more importantly, as we start to kind of peek our way out of winter, we've officially crossed that halfway point between the winter solstice and the spring equinox, which if you don't know, like it's rooted in the pagan tradition. It's February 1st and it's known as Imbolc, but basically it's just like a celebration that we're halfway to spring. And I think that whether you knew that or not, or celebrated it or not, we definitely can feel this kind of turning point of coming out of our kind of closed in winter seasons, and we're all kind of starting to open back up a little bit more. We've had a lot of time for deep self-reflection, and we're starting to take more action in and movement towards our desires and the things that we want to create for ourselves this year. And a big part of that starts with the way that we love ourselves and how we come home to ourselves. And um and of course too, it has obviously also so very much with how we interact with the people around us in the communities that we keep, and the quality of our partnerships and our closest friendships and our families. um but I think oftentimes too, we can kind of have these skewed ideas about what self-love or true love is, what it really means, what it really is, what it's supposed to look like. And that all plays such a huge role in how we support ourselves for the coming year, how we support ourselves in what it is that we're trying to create, and the people that we keep around us. Are they really helping us with these things? Are they supporting us and, really lifting us up and encouraging us in these things? Or by keeping certain people around, is it really very neutral or more hindering, even in some cases, to the person that we want to become and the things that we want to create moving forward? And a lot of this is really where a huge part of my, I guess you could say, heart journey, my big spiritual journey, it kind of really started. It started when I was introduced to a book called True Love, and it's written by a Buddhist monk named Thich Nhat Hanh. Unfortunately, he just passed away a couple of years ago, and he wrote many books, and I've read most of them. A lot of the themes are the same across the board, but all with different emphasis, different aspects of life. But this book, when I read it, was a total game changer for me, and it really helped me to raise my own standards for myself and for um like the situations that I allowed. If you listen to the last episode, I touched a little bit on tolerance, right? And the kind of the baseline, like the minimum standard of what we are allowing for ourselves. So reading this book was one of the first times that it really brought to my awareness that I had a pretty low tolerance for a lot of the things that I was allowing in my life. And it was, just a huge turning point for me to really dial up and get in tune with, my own awareness around my standards. Again, not just for myself, for my situations, for the jobs that I decided to have, for the coworkers I interacted with, for my friendships, and then obviously for my romantic relationships moving forward as well. So I hope that, this episode in particular really helps you to also feel like you've brought some awareness to these things, and gives you some real life, examples of what it looks like and how you can, to step up your game in these areas as you prepare to create what is hopefully going to be a very beautiful and bright and awesome 2024 for yourself. All right, so we're going to go ahead and dive in. And I want to start just kind of by defining a little bit more what love really is. Because I think when we think of love, we often think more so of the feeling, right? Especially the feeling of falling in love or of like being in love. And it's kind of that like face that's got hearts all surrounded by it, and it's, butterflies in your stomach and that sort of thing. And a lot of times when we think of self love, we think of, treating ourselves to something nice. We think of, bubble baths and manicures and all that kind of stuff. But I think in that we can not only have a level of discernment of what it really is and isn't, or what it really looks like and doesn't look like, but we can also see that it's so much more than a feeling, it's also an action. And not only is it a feeling and an action, it's also a state of being, right? Like when we can remember that we are love incarnate, that gives us so much more inner guidance, doesn't it? By saying to yourself, I am love, how much does that just activate kind of your internal compass towards what love really is and how you want to give it and receive it? But also how much more intentionality kind of comes along with that, right? And I think very often, both when it comes to loving ourselves and loving others, love is the intention, right? Like we intend to love ourselves, we intend to love someone else, but we just might be missing the mark in where our true feelings are or beliefs are. And we sometimes really miss the mark on where our actions lie as well. So we might intend to love someone, but if we get into a relationship with someone, but then we find that there's instability, uncertainty, discomfort, if we feel any level of fear or like a need to have control, if there's disempowerment, if there's disillusionment, if there's any of that kind of suffering, right? Right away, you can know that that's not true love. That is something completely different. That's could be a number of other things, but it's not love, that's for sure. Um, but we can also say, okay, maybe it's not necessarily those things, but I know somehow I'm still kind of missing the mark. Well, love takes practice. It does. Like to love ourselves takes practice because we're constantly evolving. We were not the same as we were yesterday or a year ago or 5 years ago. And so the ways that we loved and nurtured ourselves back then are not necessarily, going to work for us today. And the same is true, obviously, for our friendships and romantic relationships as well. As people continue to evolve, our needs change and our desires change. And so it takes practice, even outside of human evolution. Again, it's that we are constantly working on dialing in to the alignment of our intentions with our actions. And of course, all of that is very much rooted in belief, and it goes way deeper within all of us. But I think we can at least, kind of start by practicing a few of these concepts that Thich Nhat Hanh talks about in his book. I'll kind of highlight them a little bit, but then put my own kind of take and my own stories and experiences to them. And again, hopefully offer you some of that insight along the way. So he says one of the biggest aspects of true love is being there. It's giving your full attention, giving your full intention, and giving your energy, right? And if you just think about that, like that phrase, I am here for you, it invokes already so much safety and comfort, especially if you would say that to yourself, right? If you would just, in a moment where perhaps you're noticing some uncomfortable or challenging thoughts or feelings kind of coming to the surface, if you're noticing some bad memories, or if you notice that you're having a reaction in a certain way that's based on a trauma, for example, if instead we would break away from the immediate habit to distract ourselves with something else, and we would look at that part of ourselves, which is not us, by the way, because you are not your mind, you are not your body, you are not your past experiences, and you are not your traumas. But what you can do is you can look at those things and you can say, I am here for you. You can listen to those parts of yourselves that are crying out for your attention and your care, and you can hold space for them. You don't necessarily need to try to fix the problem right away. Just witness. Just listen. Just allow it to tell you why it's there, what it's there to teach you, right? And we can obviously do the same for each other as well. We don't always necessarily have to try to fix each other's problems. There's a lot of power and comfort that we can offer to people just by being there for them, just by holding that space. We're not trying to fix their problems. We're not trying to solve the world's problems. We're just there to allow them to be who they are and honoring where they're at in their process right now. We're just listening. We're just witnessing. We're just saying, hey, you are totally allowed to have all of these things going on right now, and I still love you, right? It's just being there, just plain old being there, just your presence, your attention, your intention, your energy, your time. Those things mean so much more to people than I think most people realize. And in the same breath, we can look at that phrase, I am here for you, in more of a joyful way, as in, like, I'm choosing to spend time with you right now over time somewhere else. Especially for people who maybe work a lot, but they also have like a family or partner. You know, that whole idea that you would rather be spending that time with your family, with your partner, they see that, and that means so much to them of like, hey, I'm here, let's go do this fun thing. When you could be at work, you could be, you know, trying to meet some kind of a deadline with a project. You could be maybe making more money if you make overtime, you know, that kind of thing. But that being there for that other person gives them so much validation of their importance, and they have so much joy in your presence. So being there is kind of the first really key piece of what it looks like to give and receive true love. And the next one is kind of a very natural next step. It's understanding. It's just understanding. It's understanding yourself, right? And then it's understanding, you know, your partner, your family, your friends, just having that element of not only understanding by way of conversation. Obviously, we get a lot from each other through open, honest, authentic communication, but also by observation, because very often people don't feel like they want to talk about absolutely everything that is going on with them or has gone on with them, all of the things that, you know, amounted to where they are now in life on the whole. And so we pick up on those things by observing. We don't have to, again, we don't have to react to it always all the time, but just by observing, just by listening not only to their words, but to their body language and to their actions as well. And of course, like I said, we can definitely do this more for ourselves, of course, right? Like we can definitely practice being there for ourselves a lot more so that we can understand ourselves a lot more, so that we can kind of take more again of like an observation mode with our thoughts, our feelings, our patterns, our habits, our beliefs, right? Like we can kind of take ourselves out of the equation when we know that we don't have to identify ourselves with those things. We can take ourselves out of the equation and just put on our big eyeballs and just watch ourselves do these things and then be like, whoa, like why am I doing these things? And we're we're listening to those things and watching those things so that we can better understand ourselves and where we're coming from and the things that are controlling us in our lives, probably more than we thought that they were, right? And this is, again, it's just for understanding in a very neutral or in a very loving way. It's not so that we can be hard on ourselves. It's not so that we can be critical. You wouldn't scold your partner for having difficult thoughts or patterns, or you wouldn't try to distract them from their tough memories or their traumas. So why do we do these things to ourselves? Right? Whenever I'm having like a difficult thing that I'm working through, I go to my husband and he just listens to me and he tries to give me constructive feedback. But more importantly, like I said, he listens and he just holds me and he just allows me to be whatever I am in that moment, having my process in that moment. And this is what the best people, the people who truly love us, this is what they do. They just spend time with us. They listen. Maybe they ask supporting questions to help us get to the root cause of what is going on, which I really think we should practice doing more for ourselves. But we do these things because we know that understanding and unconditional love are the keys to relieving that suffering, which brings us to the next kind of big aspect of true love, which is compassion. And you think, okay, like understanding and compassion, they're very similar, and they are, but we can't have compassion until we have understanding. And true compassion is really not only the ability, but also the desire to relieve stress and ease pain. And so you can see how that all carries in, right? These things start folding on top of each other. Okay, well, we can't do this until we are understanding, and we can't understand until we practice being there again with our attention, with our intention, right? We have to be present. We can't be compassionate if we don't know what's going on, which we can't do unless we're really truly being there, present, and we're listening, right? And so our ability to have compassion is not only a function of listening, it's also a function very much of loving communication and loving action, right? It's our ability and desire to communicate and act in a way that the other person can receive it. Or in the case of, when we are working on ourselves, when we're trying to have more deeper understanding and compassion for ourselves, it is our ability and desire to communicate and take action for those parts of ourselves that are still experiencing some level of suffering. Again, because you are not your mind, and you are not your trauma, and you're not your past experiences. So it's not you per se, it's not your heart, it's not your soul, it's just a part of you. So it's that aspect again of being able to take yourself out of the equation, but to still have compassion. Like in a lot of Thich Nhat Hanh's books, he compares this to the way that a mother holds her crying baby, right? Like we don't get angry at the baby for crying. We just go to the baby and we pick up the baby and we go, okay, like what's going on? And we try to understand why the crying is happening, right? So like that internal thing that you kind of just can't shake off, whether again that's like I think a lot of times when we have trauma, we not only experience it when we have challenging memories come up, but also when we find ourselves like waiting for the same thing to happen to us again, right? Especially when it comes to romantic relationships. Like if you've been cheated on, it's 222 right now, which is the number for yin and yang coming together. It's the number for unity. Anyway, so, um, oh, darn it. I lost my own train of thought. So compassion is, something that we need to practice having with ourselves, and we need to practice having with with other people as well. And I think it's also very much worth it to just ask ourselves, when it comes to the people that we interact with most, our friends, our family, our romantic partner, like, are we even willing to listen to them when they want to tell us about their day? Are we willing to listen when they tell us about the struggles that they're having? Or is it just like, I'm just going to sit here and pseudo listen? I'm going to pretend like I'm listening, but really I'm playing a game on my phone or daydreaming. Like, if you're not really, you have the ability to relieve that suffering, but if you don't have the desire to relieve that suffering, I gotta ask, like, why are you spending time with that person? You don't really care about what's going on with them, and you don't care to try to help them out with it. So it kind of makes me curious why people stay in these relationships where there isn't that loving compassion, there isn't really that deeper desire to try to help that person, feel some relief, but to also, in that relief, inherently to be able to fill that space with more joy and more life and more creation, right? And obviously the same thing with ourselves too. Um, and of course, I think that this also kind of begs a little bit of this, okay, so I can see how maybe I've done this before in some of my past relationships, so is it better to spend more time in between romantic relationships kind of working on myself, or is it better to spend some time playing the field? Like, I think this is one of those big points where we start to have a lot of reflection of like, oh, I really could have been there for that person a lot more than I was. And I think there's always a reason when relationships kind of crumble and fall. Like, that relationship wasn't meant to be anyway, but if you're able to look back on some relationship and be like, oh, well, I played a big part in that relationship ending because I wasn't practicing the desire to listen and be there and understand and relieve their suffering and replace it with joy and kindness and life. So what's better? And honestly, there isn't one. Like, my husband and I were laying in bed last night talking about this podcast episode, and he was just asking me what I was going to talk about, and I was giving him a general gist, and I kind of brought up, the fact that, like, working on myself and relieving a lot of my pain after my last boyfriend passed away in 2020 was a big part of the reason why I stayed single for the next, 2.5, 3 years until I met my husband, because I did not want to have any of, the traumas and the pains, as much as I could, from my last boyfriend's passing or from things picked up during that relationship or in the relationship before that. I didn't want to bring any of those things with me into the rest of my life, but certainly not into someone else's life as well. So you notice how when we don't relieve ourselves and work through our own struggles and our own trauma, that we just keep carrying them, and then eventually they come out, right? Eventually we non-consciously or unintentionally wind up projecting that onto either a good friend or a close family member or an ex-partner. And that was something that in my own mind I just resolved that I was never going to do. As much as I could possibly help it, I didn't want to pawn any of that off on whoever was going to be, my next closest relationship, my next partner. And so I spent that good almost 3 years just being single, making sure that I was relieving myself of my suffering and replacing that with more of my own empowerment, getting back aligned to who I am and who I desire to be, and the things that I desire to create in this lifetime, and getting back to that place of like, I don't need somebody to make me happy. I'm happy on my own, and people come in to add happiness to my life, right, kind of thing. And then, but then, like, he was saying how, after he divorced from his previous wife. He had a 5-year sabbatical kind of between her and me. But in that 5 years, he did take some of that initial time to be single and work on himself a little bit, but then he decided to play the field. But because every time he had a relationship, it taught him something just a little bit more, right? That helped him to have the awareness a little bit more with this relationship, and then he was a little bit better going into the next one, and then he learned something else so that he could keep getting better each time. And by the time he met me, we were really, obviously was very organic, and everything just like worked really super easily. And um that compassion that we had for ourselves played out in a very positive way when our relationship started. And I remember early on in our relationship, before I even moved in with him, and we had been talking on the phone. We talked on the phone for God, like so many hours, like 2 or 3 hours every night for, I don't know, a few weeks until I moved in. But anyway, we were talking on the phone one night, and I was, working full time and having my business on the side. But I knew that my business, is really a reflection of who I am and who I desire to be, and the service that I desire to offer to the world. And I know that this is my calling. And he was like, okay, so like what would need to happen for you to be able to make that your full time? So by virtue of the fact that early on he was asking me that question, it was already showing that he at least had the desire to help me relieve, some of the I don't know, I don't want to say stress or pain, but almost like disappointment that I hadn't in myself, that I hadn't been able to yet make my business my full-time career, my full-time calling yet by that point in time. And that like meant so much to me in that moment, that he was really being there. We were on the phone, but he was very present. He was listening, he was understanding, and he was just really open to listening to me and all of my authenticity, say, hey, this is what I feel like I'm meant to do, and this is why I haven't done it yet, you know, um, which I think very much rolls up into the next aspect of true love, which is loving kindness and joy, which again is not only the ability to add happiness, peace, and joy, but it's also the desire to bring into the relationship those things, to add those things to another person in their life, right? So again, it's kind of that rooted in that idea that I don't feel happy or anything really because of somebody else. Like, no one makes you feel anything. Things happen, and then we have a feeling as a response, right? But when it comes to being happy and feeling that sense of completeness, I think that's like or at least it has been. Maybe it's not as much anymore, but I think in the past it has been this big idea of like, I need someone to complete me. Like, no, you don't. Nope. You don't. Sorry, not sorry. You don't need someone to make you happy. You don't need someone to make you whole. You make yourself happy. You make yourself joyful. You make yourself peaceful. And you make yourself whole and complete. But what someone else can do is they come in and they can validate that for you, and they can add to those things. And I think very often what actually happens is kind of the opposite of that, that we get to a place in our life, where we've built up a lot of that for ourselves, but then we have these relationships sometimes that they start out really great. They're awesome in the beginning, and then they kind of just become this long-term thing. But as time goes on, you kind of start to not have the same level of compatibility. And so I don't think that we necessarily question whether that person is still bringing the same level or the same quality of like love and joy into our lives until we've realized that we've become the total opposite of that. Like, we don't we don't question it enough along the way because of our attachments, and probably it probably more often than not it's a function of a comfort zone, right? But we won't really admit it or allow it to come into our full awareness until we're so miserable that it's like rock bottom miserable. And even then, for a lot of time, it's like that rock bottom feels a lot more like a never-ending seabed of sand. Like they hit bottom a while ago, but they don't want to admit it. So even though they haven't been happy in a really long time, they haven't been adding happiness to the other person's life and they haven't been adding happiness to theirs, they continue to stay in this very unhappy, uncompassionate, unfulfilling relationship again and again, largely, probably for the idea of comfort zone. And I know that that was definitely the case for me. 2 relationships ago, I had been with someone. I think our total time together was like 11 years. We were together for a really long time. Like, we didn't break up until I was 29. And I remember being so irritated at myself. Like, I'm almost 30 fucking years old, and now here I am having to start fresh. Like, I was so irritated. But anyway, um, but like in our relationship, obviously in 11 years, you have like a lot of ups and downs. But it was probably like in February or March of 2017, like the last year that we were together. It was, probably February or March of that year when I had hit kind of that bottom, that seabed bottom. But I really wanted to believe that things could get better because when things had gotten difficult, they always had eventually gotten better. And it was part comfort zone, part fear of failure, part um, just not wanting to admit that things weren't working out. In a way, my pride was kind of getting in the way. And so I let the suffering between both of us kind of continue on until like July or August of that year before I finally was like, you know what? Like I don't think you love me anymore. And he was silent. And so that said everything to me, and that was when we broke it off. But in that in between time from February until July or August, it totally just felt like this, like I was trying to swim against the current in a puddle of sand. It just is like you're really not going anywhere, and every part of it feels quite suffocating. Um, but it wasn't until like a pretty major thing happened that I finally was like, okay, like now I'm definitely like in a place where you're definitely no longer adding happiness to my life. You're no longer compassionate for me. And frankly, it again, like I said in the beginning, like my intention was to love him. But if I couldn't love him in a way that he could receive it, then what did it matter? It didn't. 11 years, I don't want to say down the drain. That's not really true because that's a huge learning experience. It's a huge growing experience. But it was one of the things that definitely brought me to that place where I was like, okay, I'm my intention is to love you. I want to love you, but if you're not receiving any of the things that I'm doing, I'm feeling pretty exhausted. I'm feeling like I'm exhausted out of options and ways that I can kind of try to keep adding happiness to your life. This just isn't working. And he definitely wasn't adding happiness to my life anymore. So ultimately it came back to that place of like, well, then I have to be compassionate for myself. I have to be there for myself. I have to understand myself. I have to have compassion for myself, right? I have to practice what it's going to take to relieve this suffering and to replace it by adding more happiness back into my life, by allowing this relationship to go and and breaking away in order to create this space for that relief to come in, creating this space for new life and new growth to come in. It just you just sometimes have to get to a place, whether again that might be It might not be in a romantic relationship. It might be in a friendship. It might be in a job. It might be with someone in your family who has like belittled you and made you feel, stupid, or like you don't know anything, or maybe they've made you feel less than, perhaps, or you just are tired of the way they talk down to you all the time. Like, whatever that is, at some point, you just go, you know what? By breaking off of this relationship, I actually love myself, actually have the compassion for myself to relieve that suffering, to add happiness back into my life since I'm not getting it from the other person. And I think that there's also an element to, again, this whole concept of loving kindness and loving joy that definitely makes us have to be aware of, um, not just the question of whether it's happening or not, but the question of consistency and the question of authenticity, right? Like, they might bring joy and kindness and peace to us in one aspect of life, but maybe they belittle us in another aspect of life, right? Like, someone might be all super, oh, like, here's a good example. Okay, so my ex, the one that I was with for 11 years, like, he was very loving and supportive, and he brought a lot of joy to my life when it came to, I would say, most aspects of my life. Like, he very much supported that I was very health conscious, that I was very earth conscious. He was supportive of like my financial decisions and the places that I worked. He was always very supportive when I said, hey, like, this job is draining, I need to leave and look for something else. Like, he was supportive in all of those things. But one of like my hugest, I guess, like, hobbies or passions at the time was martial arts training. And I was training 3 nights a week for like 2 hours at a crack. And it was usually right after work. So it was like I would get up in the morning and I would go work a full day, 8.5 hours or whatever, and then go straight to the school where I was training. And for whatever reason, even though it was his idea in the beginning for me to get a hobby, then I went and got a hobby that kept me, like, it brought so much joy to my life. It that hobby brought me more compassion than most people have. Like, I was able to relieve so much of my anger, so much of my stress. I was able to work through things and find so much clarity. It brought so much joy and happiness to my life, and it brought so much fulfillment because when I got to a high enough belt level, I was able to start teaching and sharing with new students that were coming in. And then eventually, the master I worked under, he wanted to leave and retire, and he gave me the school to have ownership over. Like, it was a thing that I just loved. I just absolutely loved it. And he was so, like, dichotomous about it. Like, he complained so much that I was spending too much time there, that it was taking up too much of my time and energy, that I wasn't with him enough. But then when I would be at home with him, he didn't want to spend time with me, it seemed like. And so I was like, you gotta pick a lane, dude. Like, so it didn't have the consistency and it didn't have the authenticity. He didn't really love all of me. He loved things that I brought to the table, certainly, but he didn't love all of me, and he certainly didn't love me with a high enough level of consistency, which I didn't see at the time. It was actually right after we broke it off and I went to live alone for a while that I read True Love by Thich Nhat Hanh, and then I was like, man, I really wish I would have read this like a year ago. Would have saved me a lot of time, but whatever. Everything happens in divine timing, right? So, um, but again, looking back on these things, and I think that you can probably look back on some of the things that have happened to you in friendships and maybe in workplaces and romantic relationships as well, but we can see how a lot of times, again, it's not necessarily our intention that gets in the way, of loving somebody, but maybe it's more of like our pride and having assumptions, right? Like sometimes we don't want to be there or to try to understand ourselves and our thoughts and our patterns and our underlying struggles and traumas because we're afraid to look at those things head on and face the pain. But often we just don't want to admit that we have them in the first place. We don't want to admit that we struggle or that we have faults or that we're now responsible for um for the way that those things come up for us in our lives, and we certainly don't want to admit that we've allowed certain things to happen to us. Like, I so did not want to admit that I was 29 years old by the time I was having clarity about how bad that relationship was. I so didn't want to have to admit that at all. And I so didn't want to have to sit there and try to like pick up all of those pieces and sort through them. Um, you know, but it's a thing that is so necessary so that we don't keep carrying that around and then having those things continue to come up like I was saying before, and a lot of times it's you know, it might come up in little ways, but it might come up in really big ways. But at some point, if we don't work through those things either by ourselves or with the help of another person, I'm sure already you're thinking of like, oh wow, yep, I remember this time when there was this like miscommunication because of something I should have said that I didn't, or something that I did say that I shouldn't have, or because I was making an assumption about what somebody meant, or you know, having lack of patience for somebody else, um, or just the plain old like um, just the plain old fear that sits there sometimes that we don't necessarily know is there, and we don't necessarily know right away that it's playing a role, but meanwhile we're making these like little bits of assumptions all along, or we're just kind of like waiting for the next shoe to drop. You know, I'm sure that you can look back on some of these things and just be like, yep, that created way more drama and stupidity than it was ever worth. And especially when it comes to assumptions. Again, sometimes the things that we assume they're just so little, but a little assumption makes a little frustration sometimes just on the wrong day at the wrong time when you're in the wrong mood, and it becomes like a little bomb that goes off. You know, when all we really needed to do was maybe just go to that person and ask a clarifying question. Hey, why did you move that thing over there? That's not where it lives. You know, or like, or you, this is what my husband does to me all the time because I'm a double air sign, and I have this thing where like I know I need to get things done, and I know that I can start doing something, but I maybe can't finish a task until something else is done, so I'll leave that thing out until I can come back and finish the task, and then he'll be like, "Hey, are you done with this yet?" I'll be like, "No, I'm still doing this with it." Like that's a conversation, a 2-minute conversation we probably have about 10 times a day. Thank God for his patience and compassion and for his love of me no matter what I'm doing in any given day. But then I'm sure you can think of other times where assumptions have really been like a way about something way bigger, and it was like a way bigger deal, and then again it was like a bomb that went off, right? Um so I can think of like something that happened during the time that I was with Tony. So Tony, he worked on himself a lot. He had a lot of childhood trauma that he carried, and a lot of things that he had worked through, but other things that he hadn't. And so in his adulthood, he was an alcoholic. And by the time we had started dating, he had been clean for, you know, some years. But he certainly, you know, he's like the rest of us, like not perfect. You know, he had one or two relapses. And I remember one relapse he had in particular, like he, how do I want to say it? I remember him looking at me like he was so annoyed. And we hadn't even really started to talk about it yet. So it was like after he had already slept for like 24 hours because he was just sleeping off all the booze. It was already this super uncomfortable situation for me, and me on the inside of my head and in my heart, I'm I'm worried. I'm worried for him. Is this going to be an ongoing thing? I'm worried for us. What does this mean about us? Do we have to break up now so he can go back and get clean? Do we need to break up now because he's clearly got more things to work through? Is it like, was it my fault that he did that? Like, I've not really had a lot of encounters with addiction, so this is something I'm not super familiar with, and I don't know why it's happening or what the result is going to be, and I'm worried and I'm kind of scared and I'm kind of heartbroken. And I remember, like, just at the very beginning of our, kind of conversation about it, like, he didn't even bother asking me what was going on. He just assumed that I was angry. He just assumed that I was mad. And he looked at me and he said, "Okay, you can yell at me now." And I was like, why would I yell at you? Like, an addiction is a disease. I'm not angry at you for struggling with this disease. I'm scared and I'm worried, but like there was so much like ensuing drama and fighting that went on because he couldn't just be open with himself about his feelings and his traumas, which meant that he couldn't be open with me about his feelings and his traumas and his challenges and what was going on. And so then there were times where some of the things that he assumed about me or things that maybe he assumed about himself and his pride, like that pride just got so in the way sometimes of his own healing and of the growth of our relationship. And I mean, I could go on and on about that, but that's all I'm gonna say about that right there. But it's, sometimes it's not so much about your intention to love somebody. Sometimes it's not so much about your desire or lack thereof to love somebody. Sometimes it's just that, like, your heart is in the right place, but you've got some more things kind of going on that you need some help with. And we have to be able to bring those things to our awareness because you cannot heal what you don't fully or properly address. And you can't address it unless you accept it, unless you bring it to your awareness, unless you allow yourself to be there for yourself, to understand and have compassion for yourself, to, you know what I'm saying, to have, see how it's all stacking up now. Like, we have to have this loving attention, this loving intention, this loving listening and communication with ourselves, however frequently, in whatever quality, and however long you can do that for. But it's so important that we make the time and the energy for that so that we can get to kind of like this next phase of what true love really is, which is equanimity and freedom, right? Like, you know that you want to be free. Like, your heart and your soul does not want to be ensnared and tangled up in your challenges, in your painful memories, in all the things that make you feel so like constricted and caught up and held back, and um, all the things that create suffering and painful projections in your relationships and in your life, right? Like, we want to be free of all of that so that we can be on equal playing field with life's greatest blessings, right? Like, we want to be equal to the highest level of authenticity, like the highest level of love, the highest level of abundance, right? Like, all of these things that we want so much for ourselves, we get them when we embody them, and we get that freedom in turn, right? So you see how again these things kind of flow into each other. These aspects of love, they flow into each other, and they kind of lead you up to this place where when you can free yourself from suffering, then you can free yourself open to allow so so much and so many great things to pour in, which is what Creator is always just waiting to do with all of us, just hanging out, being like, all right, whenever this person is ready to create the space, I'm ready to give them this. you know and again, I think that was a really big kind of key thing for me in deciding to just stay completely single after Tony passed away for those few years. Is like, not only do I need to be there for myself right now, I need to have compassion and work on myself right now, but I also know that like I'm not going to be ready to receive whatever Creator is trying to give me next until I'm ready, until I've cleared all of this shit out of the way, right? All of that mental, emotional clutter, all of that trauma, like all of those beliefs that like love has to be hard, that relationships have to be hard, that it's always going to be a struggle, that it's always going to be ups and downs. Like, I have to get all of that out of the way. I have to get out of the way the idea that another shoe is going to drop, or that it's only a matter of time before my partner dies before me again. Like, I had to get all of that shit out of the way before I could be like, you know what, actually, I am love. And actually, I am I I am always healed, and I'm always healing. I am always the masterpiece and always a work in progress. I am always all of me, and I'm always worthy of being loved, and I'm easy to be loved. That was one of the things that I really had to free myself of, was this idea that I am hard to love for some reason. I think I got caught up in a lot of the idea that because I have so many like very widely varying hobbies and interests and things that I'm into, that somehow that made me hard to love. Like, maybe somebody wouldn't be able to keep up with me, or like track where my thoughts are going, or track what I felt like I wanted to do that day, or I don't know, whatever, something. but um but yeah, it was the thing that I really had to work through, and to be like, no, what, actually, I'm really easy to love. I'm really easy to get along with. I have a lot to offer, and just really freeing myself from all of those like limiting beliefs around love. And again, it's, for me, it was very much not only so that I didn't project, but so that it was also that like when I was ready, I also knew that my standards were raised. I also knew that I had elevated my standards to a place where, okay, well, if I am love, then the person I'm going to be with, the next partner, who is hopefully going to be my husband, which is what wound up happening, he is also love, and we are equals in that. I am giving and he is also giving. I am receiving and he is also receiving, right? Like, we are divinely not only on equal standing with each other in every um kind of big major way where like it really counts, but we're also equally co-creating our growth in our lives together. We're always going to that person, not for permission. I think that there's a little bit of like misnomer around that. Like, co-creating means I have to ask permission. No, it doesn't. It means I have this idea. What do you think? And then they give their input. And then you give your input. And then they give their, and you like give your inputs together to create something beautiful together, something that works for everybody involved, and that continues to create areas of more freedom rather than constriction, right? Of like, oh, well, I want it this way, and this person's just gonna have to deal with it and work around it. Nope, that's not how that goes. We're equals in this. We're creating this together. We're doing this together. And even though, like my husband and I, have different work schedules. Like even some of the little things, like we go to the same gym, and the gym offers lots of different classes, and then of course you can go whenever for like open gym time. And I love the classes. I could go to the classes all the time. But what I love even more is going to the gym with my husband and working out together. And because I work for myself, like I could go grocery shopping anytime, but I like going grocery shopping with my husband. I like co-creating this life together with him because he does add so much happiness to my life, and he is very vocal and open about the fact that I add so much happiness to his life as well. And he could go to the gym without me. He could go without me, and I could go to my classes in the morning, but he doesn't want to do that, and I don't want to do that. And so we go together. And so that is so important, that we remember that we are loving in a way that creates equality and also creates freedom. Also, really verbally and non-verbally, like energetically, communicates to the other person that they are allowed to be everything that they are, and they are allowed to have whatever process they're having at any point in time, and that you are still there loving them, not in spite of all of that, but because of all of that. Right? Like this level of love right here has no constrictions, no conditions, no prerequisites, no requirements, no expiration dates. There's no, oh, I'm not good enough for this, or they're not good enough for me bullshit. Like, nope. And there's no competition. This isn't you versus me. This isn't, like I can do it better than you can. Like, no. Again, this is a co-creation. Let's use each other's strengths to our mutual strength, and continue to rise up together, and continue to be able to have this circulation of all of these aspects of love between each other. And I'm certainly not saying that all of this is necessarily going to be played out like at work, for example. Like, I know that plenty of people, what they do for their jobs or their livelihood aspect of life is it's just for a paycheck. It's to serve their financial goals at the time. But I do certainly believe that everybody has greater purposes to serve, and that your livelihood, your job, your career can be connected to your passion, to your calling, and your purpose. And so in that way, you should see these aspects of true love played out, because there's always, again, going to be you that's involved, right? And these levels of you, and the way that you're loving and nurturing yourself, and expanding your love and your freedom out to others and out to the world, right? And of course, we're going to continue to see that played out in so many other ways as well. Like when you nurture yourself, obviously, you can see how that plays out not only in your job, or like in your passion and your calling and your livelihood. You can also see how that plays out in your physical health. You can see how that plays out in your spiritual health. You see how it plays out in your close relationships and in your communities, right? Like it becomes this thing where you start to see healing and growth and freedom in every aspect of your life, and it just keeps getting better and better and bigger and bigger. But again, it's a thing that I think we have to keep knowing, that we're always growing and we're always evolving, which means we also, we can create this. We can certainly do all of the work that we need to create this, but then to sustain it as well means we have to keep questioning it. We have to keep questioning these things along the way to make sure that we're staying on track, to make sure that we're staying in alignment with, what is kind of not only the next right step, but what's the bigger picture, and like where is my life going? Where am I tracking? What is the bigger picture of what I'm working towards right now. And when you really have that like super solid relationship with yourself, which is the most important one, then that gives you so much empowerment to look at everything that comes into your field and say it's either a fuck yes or it's a fuck no. And if it's not a fuck yes, it's a fuck no inherently. Like you get to have the empowerment to choose where you're putting your being there. You get to choose where you're putting your intention, your attention, your energy, your time. And if it doesn't line up with where you're tracking and your bigger picture desires, then you don't do it. It doesn't get anything from you. And it's neither here nor there. Like there's no hard feelings about that. Like let's just say there's people involved in that decision. There shouldn't be any hard feelings about that, because this isn't about someone else's expectation for you to do something. This is about you raising your standards. Standards don't care what you do or don't do. Standards don't care. You either meet the standard or you don't, but you don't have hard feelings about it when someone doesn't meet your standard. You just go, okay, well, you just don't meet the standard, and that's okay. Or, like I'm just not meeting my own standard today, and here's why, and here's what I'm going to do to get back in alignment. Like, but there's no expectation, right? There's just the empowerment of doing what's best for you that keeps you in your highest timeline and moving forward, always with like your most favorite version of yourself at the forefront, right? Embodying your most favorite version of yourself, your highest version of yourself, always having that resolve. And let me tell you, I learned this week that the universe fucking loves resolve. I learned it kind of on accident. Like, it was something that I had heard anyway, but I learned it real big when I had to make the decision earlier this week to, for now at least, let go of the new membership program that I just created. I just created it a couple weeks ago and I was so excited about it. But at the end of my purging cycle, I realized that it was not like the fullest expression of what I wanted it to be, and it wasn't in full alignment of where I'm tracking and where I want to go. And so I had to let it go, and I just refunded the people that signed up, and I wrote this nice email, and I just kind of took ownership, and I said, hey, like, I just got super excited about this, and I want to serve. Like, I'm always so excited to serve people. I'm always so excited to fulfill my calling in the ways that I feel like I'm meant to do that. But I let my excitement to serve people get the betterment of me. And this, this thing that I created, it's, it's not only not just like not the fullest expression of what I wanted it to be the way that it stands right now, but it's also not necessarily like gonna help me go where I know that I'm supposed to go. And so I needed to let it go, and it was like so painful. I was so sad when I had to admit that to myself, and when I had to like shut it all down. I was so sad. I cried for a little bit. but I tell you what, like later that same day, I got an email notification that some things that I ordered are on the way and they'll be here by the end of this week. And I also got a $2,000 paycheck coming in. So it was like the universe totally turned around and rewarded me for having that resolve, for staying in my lane and keeping my focus, and for loving myself enough to do the hard thing, and for loving other people enough to do the hard thing, because that means that the people who had signed up and thought that they were going to do this, they now have the space, both in time and finances, to do something that's going to fulfill them even more than I would have been able to with what I had created so far. So there really is such a great beauty and a great potent power in admitting that you can look at all of these aspects of love and you can say, yes, like at one point in time, my relationship with this thing or this person definitely like met and exceeded all of these standards, and yet right now it just doesn't anymore. And your last act of love is to let it go, to know that by letting it go, you are honoring yourself, you're loving yourself, and you are also loving that other person or the space that that thing took up, so that you both can create the space for what's better. You can create the space for healing to come in, for more growth to come in, for true love to come in. Right? I hope that that makes sense. This has been such a great conversation, and I feel like I could say so much more about this, but I am still planning on having a great episode that kind of is an extension of this with my very good friend Heather next week. Heather is a beautiful soul. She's from Louisiana. She still has a little bit of her accent, which I totally love. She is also a double air sign like I am, so we're both very just like fluid with who we are and the way that we communicate, and we are constantly bouncing wonderful ideas off of each other. She's also a psychic medium, so she can see energies just in a totally unique and powerful way. I'm very in tune with energy as well, but I don't know. There's something about the way that there's something about the way that she just sees energy that's just totally like it blows my mind every time we talk about it. And so we will definitely be bringing energetics into the conversation next week, which I'm always so excited for, because and everything is energy, and so it is absolutely always worth learning more about energy and understanding it. That makes our ability to live and create the life that we desire so much more powerful and so much easier. So I'm really excited for our conversation next week, and I think it'll be a great Valentine's Day episode. I'm sure it'll be kind of a longer one because we always just start talking and then the next thing you know, like a couple hours have gone by. But I hope that you guys will love it. I hope that you loved this week's episode. I hope that you had a lot of really great, pieces of wisdom and insight that you can take away from it and employ, in your day-to-day life, in the way that you love yourself and in the way that you have maybe a little bit higher standards and a little bit more discernment of who you're going to allow to have access to you moving forward, because you are so precious and you are so worth all of the love and all of the blessings and all of the joy in the entire world. Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode. If you did love it, if you did find it empowering and helpful, please make sure you subscribe so you'll get notified every time a new episode is out. Please also share it with anyone that you believe will also get value from it, so that together we can raise the vibration and the consciousness of the universe. Links to my email list and my Instagram page will be in the show notes for you to continue following my little, crumb trail, my little sprinkle of more food for thought, more wisdoms, joys, affirmations, mantras, all the good things. I also have lots of just really great ideas that are floating around in my brain for new episodes, new adventures, and new offerings that I'm really excited to create this year and next year. So definitely you're going to want to keep an eye on things because I'm going to be moving quick this year. So I would so love to have you along for the ride. Always remember that you are meant for more. It's coded within you. Your power, your authenticity, your native growth. Thank you so much again for joining, and I will see you all next time. Mwah!